Okay, we're back. Chapter 4, Section 2. In my book, it's page 79. Not for sure what page it is in your book. So, Johnny had just been to... Johnny's at Rab's right now talking to him, kind of telling him that, hey, he's going to Mr. Light's later today. So, Rab obviously was a Whig. I can stomach some of the Tories, he went on, men like Governor Hutchinson. They honestly think we're better off to take anything from the British Parliament, let them break us down, stamp in our faces, take all we've got by taxes and never protest. They say we American colonies are too weak to get on without England's help and guidance. But Governor Hutchinson's a good man. Of course we'll destroy him. We've marked him down. Sam Adams is already greasing the ways under him. But I can't stand men like Light, who care nothing for anything except themselves and their own fortunes, playing both ends against the middle. I'd never have picked him for a relative. But beggars can't be choosers. It happens. I'm a beggar. It's on to time to get ready to go to him. Understanding Johnny's unspoken desire not to appear too meanly before the great gentleman, Rab went to the attic above the shop where he slept, and came down with a clean shirt of finest white linen and a fawn-colored corduroy jacket with silver buttons. It's too small for me. Ought to about fit you. It did. Almost miraculously, for Johnny had not seen where it came from, bread and cheese were on the counter. It was his first food since yesterday's gorging. With a straight, fair hair, well brushed and tied behind with taffeta, the handsome jacket, the frilled, immaculate shirt, Johnny did cut a very presentable figure. By the printing shop clock, the sun had been set for almost an hour. Rab was folding newspapers. You can sleep here, he said, if they don't offer you anything. But good luck, old fellow. Okay, Section 3. Standing on Beacon Hill, so far removed from the hurly-burly of the wharves, shops, markets of town, Johnny hesitated. Should he, as a poor out-of-work apprentice, go round back? Or should he, as a long-lost something or other, raise that gleaming brass knocker on the paneled front door? The silver buttons in Rab's bold fellow heartened him. The knocker fell, and instantly a maid was bidding him enter, curtsying, asking his name. I'm Jonathan Light Tremaine. The front hall was very large. From it rose a flight of stairs, taking their time in their rising, taking all the space they needed. Along the walls were portraits. Merchant Light in his handsome, healthy youth. Lavina, painted long before in London, as regal a child as now she was a young woman. Time blackened old things, already 100 years old. Was it their long-dried blood which now ran red and living in Johnny's veins? To the left was the drawing-room, the tinkle of a sphinx, low voices, laughter. Could it be they were laughing because the maid was announcing him? He wished he had called himself merely Johnny Tremaine. Ha, 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 ha! That was Merchant Light. Fetch him in, Jenny. Just a little family party. All want to see him, eh? Johnny's first impression was of dozens of wax candles lighting the long dove-colored and lavender and yellow room. They were reflected in mirrors, silver, gleaming floors, and mahogany. A dozen people were gathered together in the far end of the room. Johnny stood a moment, anxious to do nothing wrong, conscious that the new shoes he had been so proud of did not much resemble the little black-buckled pumps on the gentleman. Well, said Mr. Light, rising, but not approaching him. So, here we are. Yes, sir. Lavina, Cousin Talbot, Aunt Best. How do you like his looks? Aunt Best, a horrifyingly ugly, cross old woman with 2 gold-headed canes, vowed through her whiskers and toothless gums that he looked just as bad as she had expected. Lavina turned from the spinet. She had on a stiff turquoise-blue dress that suited her marvelously. She looked at the boy with her head tipped sideways, as Johnny had seen other ladies look at silver teapots before they bought. At least, Papa, he's a deal handsomer than most of my relatives. Isn't he, Cousin Sewall? It was the rosy clerk, Lovelorn Sewall, who was turning her music for her. Yes, daughter. Mr. Light's eyes flickered over Johnny. Quite the little gentleman from the waist up. Silver buttons, eh? Ruffled shirt? His eyes slid over his little family party. He addressed them in so low a voice he seemed to ignore Johnny, standing at the far upper end of the long room. He had been expecting some such apparition from the past ever since last August. In spite of family efforts to keep certain things dark, he had reason to believe certain things were well known, even among the lower classes. Then he called to Johnny. Now, boy, have you brought your cup? It is here, in this bag. Very good. Will you, and all of you, please, to step into the dining room. This took some time, for Aunt Bess had to be pulled in front and pushed from behind before she was balanced on her two gold-headed canes. She scolded, muttered, and shook her whiskers at everyone, including her famous nephew. Only Lavina, still at the spinet, and Cousin Sewall, bending over her, did not go into the dining room. There on the sideboard were 3 standing cups. They were identical with Johnny's. Silently, he took his from its bag, set it with the other 3, and stood back to look at the silken, bejeweled, perfumed folk crowding around him. Mr. Light took up the cup, studied it, compared it with one of his own. Silently he handed it to a plainly dressed, thick-set gentleman, who thus far had said nothing. I think, said Mr. Light quietly, all of you ladies and gentlemen will agree that this cup our cousin, is it, has brought back tonight is one of the set. There was a murmur of assent. Johnny could hear the tiny tinkle, seemingly far away, of Miss Lavina's spinet. It is perfectly obvious that this cup now stands where it belongs. The question is, how was it ever separated from its fellows? Johnny felt that everyone there, except himself, knew the answer to this question. In fact, the merchant's voice was smooth as oil, I declare that this to be the very cup which was stolen from me by thieves. They broke through yonder window on the 23rd of last August. Sheriff, I order you to arrest this boy for burglary. The thick-set plain man, whom Johnny had already noticed, put a heavy hand on his shoulder. His formal words flowed over him. Johnny Tremaine, alias Jonathan Light Tremaine, apprentice to Ephraim Lapham, name of King and Bay Colony, standing cup, taken away the 23rd day, month, year of our Lord 1773. This is not true, Johnny said. You can explain to the judge. Very well, I can and will. The full horror of the accusation, for a boy might be hanged for stealing a silver cup, froze him into seemingly nonchalance. This coolness made a bad impression. Aunt Bess was poking at him with one of her canes. She hoped she'd live long enough to see him hanged. He was a perfect little viper, and he looked it. A florid woman was flapping a pink feather fan. She thought he had one of those falsely innocent little faces that are such an aid to evil boys. No, someone else was saying, he has a shifty eye. Aunt Bess croaked, look at those silver buttons on his coat. I'm sure he stole them. Mr. Light said, boy, where did you get that coat? It was lent me. Lent you? By whom, pray? A printer's boy. I don't know his last name. Down at the Observer office. He's called Rab. That coat is worth money. Do you think someone whose last name you admit you don't know would lend you a coat? It doesn't sound likely, but happen it's true. Sheriff, look into this. I certainly will, Mr. Light. I sent Sewall over to the Laphams, a very respectable, humble, pious, poor sort of folk. Mrs. Lapham swore this boy never owned a thing but the clothes he stood in. As for his name, she showed Sewall the papers of his indenture, signed by his dead mother. She put him down as Johnny Tremaine, no Jonathan Light about it. And Mrs. Lapham believed that lately he had taken to evil ways, stealing shoes and little things. She swore he never owned a cup. And Mr. Tweedy, a partner of Mr. Lapham,
said the boy was a notorious liar, and of most evil report. The sheriff was taking out handcuffs, snapping them on Johnny's wrist and his own. "As soon as I get this scamp locked up, I'll be back for that bowl of punch you promised, Mr. Light," he called cheerfully as he left. The last sound Johnny heard was the fairy tinkle of the spinet. The chain clanked. The sheriff said nothing until they had reached the stone jail in Prison Lane. Then, as the jailer was writing down Johnny's name in his book, the sheriff said kindly, "Now, boy, you've got some rights. Who do you want notified? Got any kin except the Lights, eh? How about old Mr. Lapham? He's my master no more. He dismissed me months ago. Relatives? Parrots? I've nothing. But will you please tell that boy down at the Observer? He's a tall boy and dark. All I know is that his name is Rab. The one you stole the coat off, eh? I was going to look him up tonight."